I never thought I'd find myself in an all-out war with my HOA, but here I am. And let me tell you, it all started with a Karen. Not just any Karen. The ultimate HOA Karen. The type who treats the neighborhood like her own personal kingdom, making up rules as she goes and punishing anyone who dares to challenge her. I had no idea what I was walking into when I moved into Sunnyside Estates. It looked like a perfect neighborhood. Clean streets, manicured lawns, and houses that all looked just similar enough to be eerie. I should have known. That's not normal. That's HOA-controlled living. I had lived in places with HOAs before, and honestly, I never had a problem. I thought it was all just standard stuff. Keep your grass mowed. Don't paint your house neon green. No crazy junk cars on the lawn. Easy, right? I was so wrong. 3 days after moving in, I was still knee-deep in unpacking. Boxes were everywhere. I was trying to figure out which switch controlled what. And honestly, I was just looking forward to a night of not tripping over my own furniture. Then, my doorbell rang. Not just a regular polite ding-dong, but an aggressive double chime, the kind that says, "You better open this door right now." I opened it to find a woman standing there, looking like she had just stepped out of a country club catalogue. Perfect white pantsuit, pearl necklace, manicured nails, the stiffest blonde bob I'd ever seen. It was the kind of hairstyle that looked like it hadn't moved since the 90s, completely resistant to wind, gravity, and possibly even nuclear blasts. She smiled, but it wasn't really a smile. More like the kind of expression a principal gives a kid before handing them a detention slip. "Hello there. You must be Michael." I wasn't sure how she already knew my name, but okay. "I'm Karen Wilkins, president of the Sunnyside Estates HOA. I just wanted to personally welcome you to our community." Before I could even thank her, she thrust a massive 3-ring binder into my hands. It was heavy. The gold-embossed title on the front read, Sunnyside Estates Community Guidelines. "Oh, number, all 78 pages are mandatory reading," she continued, her tone just a little too cheerful. "I suggest you highlight the sections on lawn maintenance and exterior modifications. We've had issues with new homeowners before." She said issues in a way that made it sound like previous homeowners had turned their yards into wastelands of broken-down cars and inflatable flamingos. I forced a smile and nodded. Sure. Thanks for stopping by." She gave a tiny nod, the kind that made it clear I was already on thin ice, then turned and marched away with the precision of a military commander. I closed the door and looked down at the binder in my hands. I should have thrown it straight into the garbage. That night, I made the mistake of opening it. The rules were insane. Not just keep your yard neat kind of rules, but next-level micromanaging lunacy. Only 12 approved shades of beige for exterior paint. Garden gnomes could be no taller than 8 inches. Trash bins could only be placed outside during a strict 12-hour window. And my favorite? No wind chimes. Yes, that was a real rule. HOA approved silence. I should have realized then and there. This place wasn't a neighborhood. It was a dictatorship. But I played along. For 6 months, I followed every single rule. My lawn, exactly 3.5 inches tall. My trash bins, out and back at the designated times. My mailbox, painted the exact shade of HOA-approved black matte. Karen drove past my house regularly in her luxury SUV, clipboard in hand, looking for violations. But she never stopped. Not once. I was winning at the HOA game. Then I made a mistake. I planted some hedges. Now, in any normal neighborhood, this wouldn't be an issue. But in Karen's iron-fisted regime, this was an act of war. The side of my yard faced a busy street, so I wanted some privacy. I checked the rule book, twice. It said natural privacy barriers were allowed, as long as they didn't exceed 6 feet in height and didn't block visibility at a street corner. I followed everything by the book. I even went below the limit, My hedges were exactly 5 feet 10 inches. I had them professionally installed by an HOA-approved landscaper. I took before and after photos to document that everything was 100% compliant. For 3 glorious weeks, I enjoyed my hedges. The noise from the street was reduced. My yard felt more private. Then I came home one afternoon and they were gone. Well, not gone, but butchered. My beautiful, perfectly legal hedges had been hacked down to 3 feet tall. Now they were nothing but stubby, pathetic little bushes. And guess who was standing in my yard, watching as 2 landscapers finished the job? Karen. She had the audacity to smile at me as I pulled into my driveway. "Karen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "what the hell is going on?" She turned, adjusting her ridiculously oversized designer sunglasses, and tilted her head like I was some clueless child. "Oh, Michael, your hedges were in violation of Code 4.7b. They were obstructing the sightline at the corner." I felt my blood pressure skyrocket. "That's not true. I followed the exact regulations. I even took measurements." She waved a perfectly manicured hand dismissively. "The board reviewed it and determined it was a safety issue. We had to take immediate action. You'll be receiving a bill for the service, of course." She handed me a $375 invoice. Then she turned on her heel and walked away. I stood there, fuming, staring at the stumps of my once beautiful hedges. And that's when I knew. Karen had just declared war. I wasn't just going to get revenge. I was going to beat her at her own game. The hedges may have been gone, but I was about to build something even better. A wall. A 6-foot cinder block, HOA-compliant wall. And there wasn't a damn thing Karen could do about it. I woke up early the next morning, still fuming over my ruined hedges. My first instinct was to go straight to Karen's house and demand an explanation, but I knew that would get me nowhere. No, Karen thrived on confrontation. She'd just twist things around and somehow make me the villain. Instead, I grabbed my coffee, sat down with that godforsaken HOA rulebook, and started digging. I needed a way to beat her. Not just fight back, win. And after hours of scouring that ridiculous document, I found it. It was buried in section 7.3, paragraph 4. Perimeter walls constructed of approved materials may be built up to 6 feet in height, provided they meet county building codes and are approved by the Architectural Committee. I read it again, and then again. The hedges were restricted, but a wall, that was an entirely different set of rules. I felt my anger turn into something else. Determination. Karen thought she had won. She thought she had control. But I was about to show her exactly what happens when you mess with someone who actually reads the fine print. That afternoon, I submitted a formal request to the Architectural Committee. Not just some lazy request on a sticky note, a full professional proposal. I attached blueprints, material specifications, and even 3D renderings of what the finished wall would look like. I made it airtight. The HOA had 14 days to approve or deny it. And if they didn't respond in time, automatic approval. I triple-checked the rulebook. There were no loopholes, no Karen clause that would let her override the system. All I had to do was wait. The next 2 weeks felt like a countdown to battle. I kept a close eye on my email, checking daily for any kind of response from the committee. Nothing. I called the HOA office twice. Both times I was told the committee was still reviewing my application. Sure, more like Karen was trying to find a way to stop it, but there was nothing she could do. And then the moment I had been waiting for, day 15. I woke up, checked my email one last time, and still, nothing. I smiled. That meant my request was automatically approved. Time to build a wall. I rented a small excavator and got to work. Barely an hour into digging, I heard the screech of tires. Karen's luxury SUV skidded to a stop in front of my house. The door flew open, and she stormed across my lawn, her heels stabbing into the grass like she was about to launch into battle. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked. I casually turned off the excavator, climbed down, and pulled out my clipboard. "Well, Karen," I said, barely containing my grin, "I submitted my request 15 days ago, and according to HOA Bylaw 7.3, my project is automatically approved since I didn't receive a response within the required 14-day period." I held up the stamped documents, making sure she saw the certified mail receipt, which, by the way, was signed by her personally. Her face turned an impressive shade of red. This is outrageous," she sputtered. "I never saw this request. It's a loophole. You're trying to bypass the system." I tilted my head. "Bypass," I said, pretending to think it over. "No, Karen. I just followed the rules. Your rules." Her fists clenched at her sides. "I'll call an emergency board meeting. We'll put a stop to this." I smiled. "You do that. In the meantime, I'll keep working on my approved project." And then I restarted the excavator, effectively ending the conversation. The next few days were glorious. Every morning Karen would drive by, watching me like a hawk, seething as my 6-foot wall slowly took shape. But she couldn't do a thing to stop it. And that's when she got desperate. I woke up one morning to find a bright orange violation notice taped to my front door. "Improper storage of construction materials. Remove immediately or face daily fines." Nice try, Karen. I grabbed the rulebook again, flipped to the construction section, and found exactly what I needed. Temporary storage of construction materials is permitted for an active project, with a 7-day grace period. I checked the calendar. It had only been 4 days. I laughed. Just to spite her, I rented a storage pod and neatly packed all my materials inside. Then, I positioned the pod exactly 17 feet from the curb, 1 foot further than the minimum requirement. Karen came by the next morning, clearly expecting to fine me. Instead, she found nothing to complain about. The look of disappointment on her face was worth every penny of that storage rental. Karen didn't stop there. She filed a formal complaint with the county, claiming I was building without a permit. Unfortunately for her, I had already gotten one. When the county inspector showed up, I handed over every document, permits, blueprints, even soil reports. He walked around the project, inspecting my work, and then turned to me. "This is some of the best residential masonry I've seen in years," he said, nodding approvingly. "Most homeowners try to cut corners. You've actually gone above and beyond the requirements." I smiled. "Appreciate it," I said, making sure Karen was within earshot. Her eyes twitched. But here's the best part. As the inspector finished up, he casually mentioned something interesting. "By the way," he said, flipping through his clipboard, "we've been trying to inspect that new HOA fountain at the entrance, but every time we come out, we're told the permits are in process." I raised an eyebrow. "HOA fountain?" "Oh yeah," he continued. "Been like that for months. Kinda odd." I knew exactly what that meant. Karen had never gotten permits for the $30,000 decorative fountain she pushed through as a community improvement. And suddenly I had the perfect way to turn the tables on her. That night, I did some digging, literally and figuratively. A quick search of county records revealed that the HOA had never filed a permit for the fountain. I filed a formal complaint, and within days, work on Karen's pet project came to a screeching halt. The county slapped the HOA with a $5,000 fine. Karen? She was furious, but this time, she couldn't do a damn thing about it. Karen was unraveling. I could see it in the way she stormed around the neighborhood, her usual composed tyranny slipping away. The HOA fountain project, her project, had been shut down. The county had fined the HOA $5,000. And despite her best efforts, my 6-foot cinder block wall was still standing. But I wasn't done, because the more I dug into the HOA's records, the more I realized something wasn't adding up. It started with a single conversation. One evening, as I was working on the final touches of my wall, my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, walked over. She was a soft-spoken, retired accountant, and one of the longest-standing homeowners in the neighborhood. She lowered her voice. "You know, I used to be the HOA treasurer before Karen forced me out." That got my attention. She leaned in slightly. "I always thought something was off. The numbers never made sense." I wiped the sweat off my forehead. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Chen glanced around, as if checking for eavesdroppers. Maintenance costs suddenly doubled after Karen hired her brother-in-law's landscaping company. When I asked for invoices, I was told they were confidential. That's not how HOA finances are supposed to work. My mind started racing. Karen had been running this HOA like a dictatorship for years. She controlled the board. She controlled the funds. And now she was about to lose control for the first time ever. If there was any chance she was misusing HOA money, I was going to find out. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I pored over every document I could get my hands on. It took hours of cross-referencing old meeting minutes, reviewing budgets, and talking to other former board members. And then, I found it. A pattern. Under Karen's leadership, the HOA's landscaping costs had doubled, despite no visible improvements. A maintenance fund had been set up, one that only Karen had access to. Over $20,000 of HOA funds had been transferred to a personal account last month. That was it. That was the smoking gun. I compiled everything into a detailed report, a 15-page document listing every suspicious transaction, every overcharge, and every financial inconsistency. And then, I printed out 100 copies, just in time for the HOA's annual meeting. The annual HOA meetings were usually a joke. Maybe a dozen people showed up, mostly the same old board members patting themselves on the back. Not this time. This time, the room was packed. The moment Karen walked in, I could tell she knew something was wrong. She wasn't her usual self. No confident strut. No smug glances. She saw me standing in the back, handing out the packets, and her expression froze. Her eyes darted around the room, realizing everyone was reading the report. Her face went pale. She hurried to the podium, gripping the microphone like a lifeline. "All right, everyone. Let's call this meeting to order. As you know, we have a lot to discuss, including our budget." "Actually," Mrs. Chen interrupted, standing up from her seat, "before we move forward, I'd like to address the financial discrepancies in this report." Karen's hands tightened on the podium. This is out of order. We have an agenda to follow." Mrs. Chen adjusted her glasses. "The bylaws state that any homeowner may bring forth concerns regarding the use of community funds. This meeting is the proper forum for that discussion." Murmurs spread through the room. Karen's eyes flicked toward the other board members, as if silently commanding them to do something. But they were silent, because they were reading the report too. A man in the front row, David Thompson, the HOA vice president, cleared his throat. "Karen, these are serious allegations. The report details over $20,000 in unexplained transactions. We need answers." Karen snapped. "This is a personal attack. This so-called report is nothing but lies. Fabrications from a disgruntled homeowner who refuses to comply with our standards." I couldn't help but smile. "Everything in that report is documented with evidence, Karen. Meeting minutes, bank transfers, even emails. Would you like to refute any specific part?" Karen was fuming. For years she had ruled this neighborhood unchecked. Now, she was cornered. Let's put it to a vote, Mrs. Chen said, her voice calm but firm. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in Karen Wilkins as HOA president. A second came instantly. Karen's eyes went wide. You can't do this, she shrieked. This is my HOA. David Thompson raised a hand. Actually, according to Article 4, Section 9 of the HOA bylaws, a motion of no confidence takes precedence over all other business if seconded by at least 10% of homeowners present. And, well, he looked around the crowded room. Karen finally seemed to understand. The vote was happening. Homeowners raised their hands, one by one. Karen looked around desperately, searching for allies. She found none. All in favor of removing Karen Wilkins as HOA president? Hands shot up. 92 homeowners voted yes. Only 2 people voted against. Karen herself and her next-door neighbor, a woman who had always looked terrified of her. The meeting erupted in quiet murmurs. Karen stood frozen at the podium, her knuckles white. Then, David stood up. In accordance with our bylaws, I will assume the role of interim HOA president until a special election can be held. My first order of business will be launching a full audit of our finances and suspending all outstanding fines until we can confirm they were issued properly. Applause broke out. Karen backed away from the podium, her face going from fury to disbelief. You'll regret this, she hissed. I couldn't help but grin. I don't think so, Karen. Maybe you should try following the rules sometime. As the meeting adjourned, Karen stormed out, her heels clicking against the floor, her power gone. And for the first time in years, Sunnyside Estates finally belonged to the homeowners again. The morning after the HOA meeting, my neighborhood felt different. For the first time since I had moved in, it didn't feel like we were all living under a dictatorship. Karen was gone. Oh, she still lived in the neighborhood, but she wasn't running it anymore. No more clipboard patrols, no more mysterious fines, no more constant threats. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other before were suddenly out and about, chatting, sharing stories, laughing. And then there was my favorite part, the reactions to my wall. The same 6-foot cinder block structure that Karen had tried so desperately to stop was now finished, painted in the exact shade of HOA-approved desert tan, looking sturdy and permanent. People loved it. Neighbors stopped by just to admire it, and a few even asked, Hey, where did you get your plans? Thinking of building something similar. That's right. Not only had I built my perfectly legal wall, but now I was inspiring others to do the same. The best part? Karen couldn't do a damn thing about it. She had lost her power. But as much as I wanted to just sit back and enjoy my victory, I knew Karen wasn't done yet. I woke up the next morning to find an HOA violation notice taped to my front door. Your wall does not meet community aesthetic standards. Please remove or modify within 14 days to avoid fines. I laughed. No, I cackled. Karen had been stripped of her title, but she was still trying to fight me. And I already knew exactly what to do. I walked back inside, grabbed my phone, and called David Thompson, the new HOA president. Hey, David, just wanted to check. Do violation notices still need to be signed off by the board before being issued? There was a pause on the other end. Yeah, why? I smirked. Because I just got one, and something tells me you didn't approve it. Another pause, then a low chuckle. Bring it to me. I did, and just as I suspected, it wasn't official. Karen had printed out a fake violation notice and stuck it to my door, hoping I'd fall for it. David shook his head. Unbelievable. She really can't let it go. I grinned. Yeah, but I think it's time someone officially reminds her. She's not in charge anymore. That evening, David personally walked up to Karen's door. Neighbors watched from their porches as he knocked. A moment later, Karen opened it. looking furious to see him standing there. David didn't waste any time. "Karen, I need to talk to you about the fake violation notice you left at Michael's house." Karen's face twitched. I don't know what you're talking about." David held up the paper. "Really? Because it looks a lot like the ones we used to issue under your leadership, except now they require board approval." Karen's lips pressed together into a thin line. David sighed. "Karen, this has to stop. You're not on the board anymore. If you try anything like this again, we'll have to take further action." Her eyes flashed with anger. "You can't threaten me. I still live here." David just gave her a small, satisfied smile. "Yeah, you do. Which means now, you have to follow the same rules as everyone else." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Karen standing there, seething. For the next few weeks, things were quiet. Karen stopped harassing me, stopped patrolling the neighborhood, stopped leaving fake violation notices on people's doors. It was almost like she was finally giving up. But then, one final twist. One morning, I was taking out the trash when I noticed something strange. A black sedan was parked outside Karen's house. A man in a suit was standing at her door holding a folder. At first, I thought it might just be a solicitor. Then Karen stepped outside, and I saw the look on her face. It wasn't anger. It was fear. The man handed her the folder. She opened it, flipped through a few pages, and suddenly her expression crumbled. Her hand started shaking. Then, without another word, she turned and slammed the door shut. I was dying to know what was in that folder, and I didn't have to wait long. The next day, David knocked on my door again. He grinned. "You're gonna love this." I raised an eyebrow. "What?" He handed me a printed document. It was a formal legal notice. Karen Wilkins was under investigation for financial misconduct. The new HOA board had conducted an audit, and the results were worse than we expected. Tens of thousands of HOA dollars were missing. Suspicious payments had been made to consulting firms that didn't exist. Illegal fines had been issued, with the money going to a personal account, Karen's account. I let out a low whistle. Damn. She really thought she'd never get caught, huh? David nodded. Yeah, but now, the county's involved. She's looking at serious legal trouble. I couldn't help but smile. This woman had spent years lording over this neighborhood, thinking she was untouchable. But in the end, she destroyed herself. I glanced over at my 6-foot wall, still standing tall, and took a deep breath. Well, I said, grinning, I guess she finally learned. Some walls aren't meant to be messed with. David chuckled. That, my friend, is poetic justice. And with that, we shook hands. Victory had never felt so damn satisfying.